Welcome, everybody. Happy Sunday. It is July 28th, 2024. It is our last and final session on The Guardian. We are so happy to have with us Miss Violetta Zane, who is not just the person who put this together, this beautiful chronology, which is this is the last session, but she worked on the Utterance Project with Mr. Adil Basumian. With that being said, this last session is about to begin. We welcome all of you who are joining with us to please go and look at the sessions online that are preceding this one. This is the last session. So we welcome all of you, please, to look at the Clearwater Bahá'í's channel, to go on YouTube, do the search. If you're on Facebook, of course, the Bahá'í Center of Clearwater, the page will have these videos in a playlist form. You can go and start from the beginning. With that being said, we are so grateful, Violetta, that you've been with us every single step of the way, all of these sessions until now. We appreciate all of you who have been with us from the beginning until the end. And again, lastly, we, as a community, thank Ms. Violetta Zane for all her hard work putting this together. We really appreciate you, and we thank you for all your hard effort, your thousands of hours, and most importantly, all of you who have been here along the way to support this beautiful, this much needed endeavor. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, dear friends. Today is going to be the most difficult part of the life of Shoghi Effendi. It's going to be the most difficult part for me to present, and it's going to be the most difficult part for you to hear. Over the course of the last 21 Sundays, we've experienced the life of Shoghi Effendi week after week, and we've grown to love him and to know him deeply. We've spent almost half a year together now with Shoghi Effendi, and in the course of a single day, we're going to lose him. We rejoiced in his wonderful childhood, chanting the verses of Abdul Baha in the stairs of Abdullah Pasha in Akka. We traveled with him to Egypt to see his beloved grandfather. We went to Beirut with him, and then we went to Oxford with him during his university studies. We watched Shoghi Effendi grow up. We cried with him when he lost Abdul Baha. We marveled in pure joy, but also in indescribable astonishment as he became the guardian of the faith of Baha'u'llah and built the Baha'i administrative order from the ground up. He fearlessly protected time and time again the faith against its enemies, both internal and external. We were filled with joy when he married Rúḥíyyih Khánum, and we were filled with excitement when he crossed Africa twice from South Africa to Egypt. We watched the Guardian create new institutions in the administrative order of the faith, the International Baha'i Council, the institution of the Hands of the Cause that were named in 3 contingents during his life, of course, instituted by Baha'u'llah, but really developed by Shoghi Effendi, and of course, the auxiliary boards which he created. We watched Shoghi Effendi create gardens. We watched him almost stone by stone build the superstructure of the Shrine of the Bab and the International Baha'i Archives. All the while, translating most of the major works of Baha'u'llah into peerless, extraordinary English, while at the same time writing 30,000 letters and cables over the course of his guardianship, writing God Passes By, a survey of the 100 years of the faith published in 1944 for the centenary of the Declaration of the Bab, and hosting pilgrims, wave after wave of pilgrims, both Western and Eastern. And today we are gathered together to pay our last respects to our Shoghi Effendi, our guardian. The Guardian, Part 21, 4th of November, 1957, the passing of the Guardian. This part covers the life of Shoghi Effendi at the age of 60 in 1957. Shoghi Effendi's statements prior to his passing. 1956, 1957, this work is killing me. The background is a map of the halfway point of the 10-year crusade. We will be speaking about that one quite a lot today. One day, when Rúḥíyyih Khánum was going through various lists and numbers with the Guardian, he said to her, as he had many times during the last year of his life, "This work is killing me. How can I go on like this? I shall have to stop it. It's too much. Look at the number of places I have to write down. Look how exact I have to be." The Guardian's spiritual will and testament. The dispensation of Baha'u'llah holds a very special rank among the letters of Shoghi Effendi. Rúḥíyyih Khánum herself makes it abundantly clear that the Guardian attached a tremendous amount of importance to this long letter dated 8th of February 1934 and addressed to the Baha'is of the United States and Canada, where he sheds light on the station of the three central figures of the faith, the guardianship and the administrative order. Rúḥíyyih Khánum states in The Priceless Pearl, "However Shoghi Effendi felt in his inmost heart about his other writings, I know from his remarks that he considered he had said all he had to say in the dispensation." Shoghi Effendi repeatedly stated to Baha'i pilgrims that the dispensation of Baha'u'llah should be regarded as his spiritual will and testament, and often to Persian pilgrims, the Guardian would refer to it as his will. These, of course, have the value of pilgrim notes, but we do have a concrete and undeniable evidence from the Guardian himself about the importance of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah and what space it occupied in his mind in terms of importance. In a letter to an individual dated 11th of May 1934, he wrote, "Shoghi Effendi was pleased to learn of the response which the dispensation of Baha'u'llah has awakened in your community. It is his hope that the believers will, through their careful and continued study of this important communication, acquire a new vision of the cause and will be stimulated to redouble their efforts for the expansion and consolidation of their work for the faith." But perhaps the clearest testament to this strong feeling of the Guardian about the dispensation of Baha'u'llah comes from a letter he wrote to the hand of the cause, Dr. Mühlschlegel. Dr. Mühlschlegel had written to the Guardian if it would be possible for the German National Spiritual Assembly to publish a compilation of both the Will and Testament of Baha'u'llah and the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha. The Guardian responded that this would be permissible, but that they should also consider adding the dispensation of Baha'u'llah to the compilation. In his letter, the Guardian called the dispensation of Baha'u'llah an invaluable supplement and annex to the Will and Testament of Baha'u'llah and the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha. What will become of you? The photograph you see here is a photograph of the widow of the Guardian, hand of the cause Amatul Baha Rúḥíyyih Khánum, in Monrovia, Liberia in January 1971. One day, in the last years of his ministry, the Guardian was passing by Rúḥíyyih Khánum's desk when he looked at her and said, "What will become of you when I die?" Rúḥíyyih Khánum, frightened and agitated, said, "Oh, I don't want to live after you. Don't say such terrible words." The Guardian didn't pay attention to anything Amatul Baha was saying. He continued, uninterrupted and thoughtfully, "I suppose you will travel and encourage the friends." Those were the only words the Guardian had ever spoken to Amatul Baha Rúḥíyyih Khánum regarding her life without him in 20 years of marriage. But the Guardian's words were prophetic. Rúḥíyyih Khánum would spend the rest of her life traveling around the world and encouraging friends. I am getting so tired of my papers. One evening, the guardian came to dinner at the Western Pilgrim House in a deeply troubled mood. He didn't want to eat, and when Rúḥíyyih Khánum urged him to have some food, he pushed the plate aside. He began to speak in a very introspective way. You know, before Baha'u'llah passed away, the master went to see him in Bahji and found his papers strewn all over the sofa. The master collected them and laid them on the divan next to Baha'u'llah. He said, Baha'u'llah, I have collected your papers and I've put them in order and I've put them here for you. Baha'u'llah said, it is of no use to gather them. I must leave them and flee away. Shortly before Abdul Baha passed away, they found his papers scattered about his room. And Abdul Baha was very meticulous with his papers. His secretaries collected the papers, put them in order, and brought them to the master. But he put them aside and said, I am done with the papers. It is finished now. I don't want them anymore. Shortly thereafter, he passed away. I am getting so tired of my papers. I don't want them anymore. I just don't want these papers anymore. I'm going to throw them away just like Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha did. Summer to October 1957, the last weeks of Shoghi Effendi's life. September 1957, the garden begins to work on his last great map. About 2 months before he passed away, Shoghi Effendi caught a cold and a fever. On the second night, the fever was gone, but it was understood, perhaps by Rúḥíyyih Khánum more than by Shoghi Effendi, that he would remain in bed and rest. But the guardian decided to spend that day working on his last great map of the 10-year crusade, which he named the halfway point of the 10-year crusade. On this utterly thrilling map, the guardian would create a massive infographic of the progress accomplished in the victories won, the territories settled, the countries and islands open to the faith. For 2 months, the guardian worked a great deal on this map, updating it with new information as it came. He would work on it right up until 2 days before he passed away. That day, in September 1957, the day he first started working on the map, he worked on it for 10 hours straight. Summer 1957, Shoghi Effendi's last trip to Europe. This is one of Shoghi Effendi's favorite places, Interlaken, and the Jungfrau, one of the main summits of the Bernese Alps. By 1957, there was a surge of activity in the administrative order of the faith worldwide. Bahá'í institutions were functioning at full capacity on all 5 continents, and although his own driving power never left him and he never decreased his long hours of work until the day he died, Rúḥíyyih Khánum could feel that Shoghi Effendi was deeply, deeply tired. In the summer of 1957, Shoghi Effendi left Haifa for the last time. And he took Rúḥíyyih Khánum back to all his favorite places in Switzerland, all his favorite mountain retreats, which he had visited and loved for 3 decades. And Shoghi Effendi's health was excellent throughout the summer. Looking back on her last grand tour with the guardian, Rúḥíyyih Khánum said, that last summer, he went back to visit many of his favorite scenes in the mountains, and I wondered about this too when the blow fell. But at the time, I was only happy to see him happy, forgetting for a few fleeting moments the burdens and sorrows of his life. The only trace that we have of a guardian, from the guardian during his last summer in Messages to the Baha'i World 1950 to 1957 is a single cable bearing wonderful news, the partial accomplishment of one of the objectives of the 10-year crusade, which was the reinterment of the remains of Baha'u'llah's father, dated 17th of July, 1957. End of September 1957, the guardian is in perfect health. For the past 10 years since 1947, the Guardian had been under the care of an excellent doctor who saw him at least twice a year. Shoghi Effendi had even consented to special treatments aimed at improving his general health and reducing his blood pressure. The doctor often urged Shoghi Effendi not to overdo things when he returned to Haifa, to get more exercise and especially more rest. When he examined Shoghi Effendi, the doctor commented on his excellent health. He found Shoghi Effendi's blood pressure lower than it had been in years. And essentially, he gave the Guardian a clean bill of health. This was 6 weeks before the Guardian's passing. Sunday, October 20th, 1957, Shoghi Effendi and Rúḥíyyih Khánum arrive in London. It's a beautiful picture from July 1957 of Trafalgar Square in London. Shoghi Effendi and Rúḥíyyih Khánum arrived in London on Sunday, October 20th, 1957, after their trip to mainland Europe that summer. They were in London because the Guardian wanted to make some final purchases for the interior furnishings of the International Bahá'í Archives before returning to Haifa. The reason why Shoghi Effendi chose London to do this shopping was because at the time, London was an internationally renowned center for vintage and antique ornaments, with a bustling and diverse range of shops, with treasure troves of unique and extraordinary pieces unmatched in the entire world. London was where Shoghi Effendi would purchase the most iconic objects in the International Bahá'í Archives, those really refined and beautiful Chinese and Japanese lacquer cabinets, as well as all of the distinctive ornaments in the gardens, the eagles, the fountains, the peacocks, those kinds of things. The Guardian was eager to return to Haifa to transfer the priceless, precious relics from the 6 rooms that they were in into their newly completed permanent home in the befitting International Bahá'í Archives on the Ark on Mount Carmel. But then both Shoghi Effendi and Rúḥíyyih Khánum caught the Asian flu. The 1957-1958 Asian flu pandemic. The picture you're looking at is one of the only pictures that we have of the Asian flu epidemic. It's 168 infected patients in a sports arena in Luleå, Sweden in 1957. In late 1956, early 1957, the first case of an influenza virus, a new influenza A virus, subtype H2N2, broke out. By the middle of March, the Asian flu had spread all over China. On April 17th, 1957, the Times reported that it had spread to Hong Kong and infected thousands. By mid-May 1957, 680 people had died of the Asian flu in Singapore. The virus was spreading fast across the planet. By the end of May 1957, the outbreak had spread across mainland Southeast Asia to Indonesia, to the Philippines, to Japan, to Taiwan, and 100,000 people had caught it. It was in June 1957 that the Asian flu reached the United Kingdom. The Asian flu of 1957-1958 is estimated to have killed between 1 and 4 million people worldwide, making it one of the deadliest pandemics in history. An estimated 33,000 deaths in the United Kingdom were attributed to the flu outbreak. The number of deaths in the United Kingdom peaked on the week ending October 17th. Remember that. With 600 reported in England and Wales. That's right 3 days before the Guardian arrives in England. Sunday, 27th of October to Monday, 28th of October, 1957, Shoghi Effendi falls ill. We are going to go day by day. Sunday, 27th of October, 1957, and Monday, 28th October, 1957, Shoghi Effendi and Rúḥíyyih Khánum contract the Asian flu. Starting on Sunday, the 24th of October, 1957, just 4 days after their arrival in London, Rúḥíyyih Khánum began having fevers, and she was confined to bed. 3 days later, On October 27th, 1957, just 1 week after their arrival, Shoghi Effendi told Rúḥíyyih Khánum that he felt pain across the knuckles of both of his hands. Rúḥíyyih Khánum asked Shoghi Effendi if he had any other pains, and he said no, just his fingers, which were stiff and caused him pain, adding, "I feel so tired, so tired." Rúḥíyyih Khánum begged the guardian to rest, and that if he did not want to stay in bed, he should at least try to rest quietly because it was probably catching the Asian flu. The guardian began exhibiting symptoms of the Asian flu just 9 days after the height of the pandemic, which was October 17th. By Monday, 28th of October, 1957, the guardian had a fever of 39 degrees Celsius, 102.2 Fahrenheit, and Rúḥíyyih Khánum successfully located an excellent doctor on Harley Street. The doctor immediately prescribed medication for the guardian. That evening after work, the doctor returned and examined Shoghi Effendi carefully. He listened to his heart and chest, took his temperature and pulse, and diagnosed that both Shoghi Effendi and Rúḥíyyih Khánum had contracted the Asian flu. The guardian's case was more severe, but still he and Rúḥíyyih Khánum worked through their illnesses. Shoghi Effendi loses his appetite. What you see here is a 1920s photograph of the house of Aboud, where Asiye Khánum passed away, which is in the story below. For several weeks before and during his illness, the guardian had lost his appetite. Several times, Shoghi Effendi told Rúḥíyyih Khánum, "I don't know what has happened to me. I have completely lost my appetite. I don't eat for 24 hours, but I still have absolutely no appetite whatsoever. It is now weeks that I have been like this. The same thing is happening to me that happened to Baha'u'llah when he lost his appetite after Nawab died." Tuesday, October 29th to Friday, November 1st, 1957, the week of Shoghi Effendi's illness. Tuesday, October 29th to Friday, November 1st, Shoghi Effendi's fever. By Tuesday, October 29th, Rúḥíyyih Khánum had contracted bronchitis, a usual side effect of the flu, and she was coughing because of an inflammation in the airways of her lungs. Still, the doctor felt that Rúḥíyyih Khánum had recovered enough to allow her to go out and run an important errand. The doctor first examined the guardian, then checked on Rúḥíyyih Khánum, and then he updated Rúḥíyyih Khánum on the guardian's condition, which allowed Rúḥíyyih Khánum to find out exactly how well the doctor felt he was progressing. Shoghi Effendi still had a very high temperature. That day, they received a lot of mail, but because he had a fever, Rúḥíyyih Khánum managed to persuade the guardian not to attend to the mail. In the morning of Wednesday, October 30th, the next day, the guardian called for his mail and insisted on going over it personally, as he had always done in the 36 years of his ministry, and he answered a large number of cables. Shoghi Effendi and Rúḥíyyih Khánum worked all week until the guardian told her towards the end of that week, "Do you realize that we have done nothing but work this week?" The guardian under the care of a compassionate doctor. Shoghi Effendi was very anxious to leave London and return to Haifa, but unfortunately for him, he was under the care of an excellent and meticulous doctor, and he told Shoghi Effendi frankly that if he did intend to leave London, he was free to call on another physician, because he, as long as he was his primary care doctor, would refuse to give his consent to let Shoghi Effendi leave England until after his fever had fallen. The doctor, of course, took a great liking to Shoghi Effendi and took care of him very well. He came every day, usually staying for half an hour, and would sit with the guardian, examining him thoroughly, and they would talk. One of these evenings, the doctor stayed a full hour. Every time the doctor came, he found Shoghi Effendi sitting in bed and reading and surrounded by papers, his briefcase by his side, and one day he asked Rúḥíyyih Khánum privately what was the guardian's work. Rúḥíyyih Khánum replied that Shoghi Effendi was a religious leader and he had many responsibilities. The doctor had, as many people did, been charmed by the guardian's magnetic and lovable personality, and one night before leaving, he turned to Rúḥíyyih Khánum and said he was smiling tonight. The doctor told the guardian that on Friday, 1 November, he was allowed to get up, sit in his armchair for 2 reasons: a change from Shoghi Effendi sitting up in bed, and also in order to get his strength back. But Shoghi Effendi preferred to work sitting in bed and resting now and then. This is another heartbreaking fact that made Shoghi Effendi's death so sudden and shocking, was that throughout the length of his illness, the guardian was never bedridden. He always had the strength every single day to get up and walk around. At no time during the Asian flu was the guardian in any way incapacitated, but he was weak and he had lost his appetite and he had this fever that was taking its time to go away. But there was absolutely zero indication that he would die in 3 days. There was no indication whatsoever. Saturday, November 2nd, 1957, the guardian's last day of work. Saturday, 2nd of November, the guardian works on his beloved map. The map he'd started in September, remember? On Saturday, November 2nd, 1957, the guardian told Rúḥíyyih Khánum that he wanted a large table placed in his room, big enough so that he could lay his final masterpiece, big enough so that he could work on the whole thing at once. And Rúḥíyyih Khánum protested with the guardian, begging him not to work. She said that in a few days he would be much better, he would be stronger, and he could finish his map then. The guardian replied, "No, I must finish it. It is worrying me. There is nothing left to do but check it. I have 1 or 2 names to add that I have found in this mail, and I will finish it today." Rúḥíyyih Khánum had 2 small mahogany tables drawn together to create the large surface that the guardian wanted. The guardian stood in front of his map, working on it for 3 hours that day. The table the guardian was working on was covered with scattered pencils, a penknife, an eraser, rulers, and a compass, and the guardian's enormous statistical booklets of languages, tribes, countries, temples, Hazratul Quds, work completed, work to be done, ongoing work, work completed. The booklet had doubled in size since the last time he worked on a map in 1952. Shoghi Effendi told Rúḥíyyih Khánum he wanted her to carefully check the data with him. And he stated that apart from adding a few extra details and cross-checking what was already on the map, the work was finished. The guardian's last map was done. On the very first day the guardian had started working on the map in September 1957, he was ill. And the guardian was ill again on the very last day that he finished working on it. Rúḥíyyih Khánum was the only one to make this parallel. And she elevates our understanding of the guardian's last act by helping us see it through the lens of sacrifice. Indeed, it seems a strange coincidence that the first time and the last time he worked on the map should both have been occasions on which he was ill, symbolic of the great sacrifice of his life and strength that went into the conception and prosecution of the World Crusade. Saturday, November 2nd, still the guardian's sad words. After working on his map for 3 hours that afternoon, the guardian looked tired. He returned to bed sitting up and continued reading the many reports he'd received. He ate only a mouthful at lunch and refused dinner. Guardian was very, very sad and depressed when speaking to Rúḥíyyih Khánum about his winter plans in the Holy Land that evening. Who is going to go back and do all these things? I have no strength left. I am like a broken reed. I can't do anything more. I have no spirit left to do anything more. Now we will be going back. Who is going to go up that mountain and make all those plans and stand for hours and supervise the work? I can't do it. And I'm not going to do anything about the houses at Bahá'í. Let them stay like that until I see how I feel. And I'm not going to furnish the inside of the archives this winter. It can wait another year until everything that needs to be bought to furnish it is collected. I shall just see the pilgrims and stay in my room, and the rest will do. I'm not even going to take the telegrams back from Jessie Ravel and make copies of them and keep all the receipts the way I've done all these years. She did it this summer. She can go on doing it in the winter. I'm too tired. The Guardian went on like this, speaking to Rúḥíyyih Khánum for a long time that evening. The plans the Guardian was referring to were plans he'd made several months before, and he enthusiastically discussed them with her many, many times. They included working in the gardens above the International Bahá'í Archives, furnishing the archives, overseeing the demolition of the last covenant breaker buildings in Bahji, using the rubble to extend the gardens around the Harami Akdas. The Harami Akdas is the name for the most holy precincts right around the shrine of Baha'u'llah. But it was not the first time that Rúḥíyyih Khánum had ever heard Shoghi Effendi speak to her with some measure of sadness, but it was the first time that he spoke to her with so much intensity and in so much specific terms and in so much more specific detail than he had in the past. And Rúḥíyyih Khánum was quite distressed. That evening, the doctor's visit. That evening, when the doctor came to make his house call, he was satisfied with the progress in the Guardian's health, and he said that Shoghi Effendi would certainly leave England on Tuesday morning on the 5th of November. He also told Shoghi Effendi he could go out and get some fresh air if he wanted. They spoke together for a while, discussing the news on the radio and the news specifically that announced that there were 200 people that had just died of the Asian flu in England. When the doctor left that night after staying quite a while, the Guardian said he didn't need to come the next day, Sunday, which was a doctor's day of rest. After he left, the Guardian told Rúḥíyyih Khánum, I like him very much. He's a fine man and a good doctor. Sunday, November 3rd, 1957. Rúḥíyyih Khánum's last evening with Shoghi Effendi. The Guardian's health improves. This is a rare photograph of a postscript to a letter in Shoghi Effendi's handwriting. This is what usually happened is Shoghi Effendi would get the mail, would tell Rúḥíyyih Khánum how to answer it, she would type it, he would read the response, approve it, and then in his own handwriting, he'd leave a postscript. And this is an image of his very distinctive handwriting. On Sunday, November 3rd, 1957, The Guardian added his usual postscripts to the letters which Rúḥíyyih Khánum had written. He looked over some of his other matters, dictated instructions for Rúḥíyyih Khánum for mail, and told her to write 2 additional letters that afternoon. The Guardian remained in his room, reading his papers in bed or attending to matters at his desk. He read the letters that Rúḥíyyih Khánum had typed. He added postscript to one of the letters. The Guardian became very, very upset about what was in one of the reports, and that report spoke about covenant breaking. Shoghi Effendi had updated Rúḥíyyih Khánum very regularly several times over the course of the last few days on news of new and recent covenant breaking and covenant breakers, and the subject always greatly distressed Shoghi Effendi. It's very, very heartbreaking for us to realize that covenant breaking was a shadow over the guardianship, over Shoghi Effendi's entire 36-year ministry from the very beginning to the very end. Although they had agreed that there was no need for the doctor to visit that day, the doctor still called to ask about Shoghi Effendi's health. Rúḥíyyih Khánum answered the phone, standing beside Shoghi Effendi. The doctor said he was willing to come if it was needed, but Rúḥíyyih Khánum conveyed a message on the part of Shoghi Effendi that he felt better and that there was no need for him to come. Then they agreed the doctor would make his last call the following afternoon, Monday, November 4th. But by then, the Guardian would be no more. Rúḥíyyih Khánum's last evening with the Guardian. Rúḥíyyih Khánum sat in the Guardian's room, and they talked for a while about everyday things. At 9:30 p.m., Rúḥíyyih Khánum asked Shoghi Effendi if he wanted to go to sleep, because she was sure he was tired. Shoghi Effendi asked her, well, what time is it? 9:30. Then Shoghi Effendi said, it's too early to go to sleep now. If I go to sleep now, I shall wake up early, and then I won't be able to go back to sleep again. Stay a little while longer and talk. 30 minutes later, at around 10 p.m., Rúḥíyyih Khánum asked the guardian if he wanted to go to sleep now, and he said yes. Rúḥíyyih Khánum did the last few things to make him comfortable, and after saying good night, she asked the guardian to be sure and call her in the night if he needed anything. For the second night in a row, Rúḥíyyih Khánum suffered insomnia. Her heart was heavy. That was the last time Rúḥíyyih Khánum ever spoke to the guardian. Monday, November 4th, 1957, the passing of Shoghi Effendi. On the morning of Monday, November 4th, 1957, Rúḥíyyih Khánum went to the door of the guardian's room, knocked gently, and received no answer. She entered. The curtains were drawn over the windows and the room was in twilight. She saw the beloved guardian lying on his left side facing her, with his left hand folded over his right shoulder, and his right arm over his left one, looking relaxed and comfortable. Rúḥíyyih Khánum asked the guardian how he had slept, and if he felt better. When Shoghi Effendi neither moved nor replied and seemed unnaturally still, Rúḥíyyih Khánum felt a wave of agonizing fear sweep over her. The guardian had passed away hours ago, in the middle of the night, gently and serenely. Within 2 minutes of discovering Shoghi Effendi had passed away, Rúḥíyyih Khánum had called his doctor at the hospital and begged him to come immediately in case there was still something to be done. The doctor arrived immediately, and then a second physician arrived and confirmed death. Shoghi Effendi completely recovered from the Asian flu. That was not what had taken our guardian from us. The guardian's official cause of death was coronary thrombosis, a blood clot in the blood vessels or arteries in the heart that causes an immediate heart attack. Nothing could have saved the guardian's life. Not even if all the doctors, the best doctors of the world, had been standing right by his side. The dignified and gentle deaths of Baha'u'llah, Abdul Baha, and Shoghi Effendi. On Saturday, 29th of May, 1892, at 3 in the morning, Baha'u'llah gently passed away. 8 hours after sunset, at the age of 75, in his own bed in the mansion of Bahá'í, with no sign of the fever that had plagued him for 3 weeks. His spirit had winged its way to the next world. 29 years later, on Monday, 28th of November, 1921, Abdul Baha woke up at 1:15 in the morning, rose from bed, walked across his room to a table, drank a glass of water, returned to bed, saying he was a little too warm, drank a little bit of rose water, sweetly chided his daughters for asking him to eat, closed his eyes and passed away less than a minute later. Abdul Baha's face was so serene and so peaceful and so calm that his daughters didn't even realize he'd passed away. And on the 4th of November, 1957, 65 years after Baha'u'llah and 36 years after Abdul Baha, Shoghi Effendi passed away in a peaceful, calm, painless, and dignified manner. And like his great-grandfather Baha'u'llah and his grandfather Abdul Baha before him, Shoghi Effendi died in the middle of the night. Monday, November 4th, 1957. Rúḥíyyih Khánum informs the hands of the cause of the guardian's passing. In the early morning, Rúḥíyyih Khánum was the only Baha'i in the world who knew the guardian had died. She was half mad herself with grief in her own words. And suddenly, in the space of just mere hours, she had not only lost her beloved guardian, but she'd also lost her husband and become a widow. Yet despite her intense personal trauma, Hand of the Cause Amatul Baha Rúḥíyyih Khánum found it within herself to find a way of conveying this devastating news to all the Baha'is in the world. But before this, Rúḥíyyih Khánum immediately informed the Hands of the Cause. Because she was in London, the first thing she did was to summon Mr. Hassan Balyuzi, who had been appointed a Hand of the Cause only 1 month before, and he was by her side within the hour. Rúḥíyyih Khánum then contacted Hand of the Cause John Ferriby, also newly appointed and also in London, and she enjoined him to silence and asked him to come quickly. Then, at 2 in the afternoon, Rúḥíyyih Khánum informed Hand of the Cause Ugo Giaccheri. Monday, November 4th, was a holiday in Italy, the annual National Unity and Armed Forces Day, and Hand of the Cause Ugo Giaccheri was at home in Rome. At 2:10 p.m., the phone rang, and Ugo Giaccheri heard the operator tell him to stand by for a long-distance phone call. 5 minutes later, at 2:15 p.m., Ugo Giaccheri heard the voice of Rúḥíyyih Khánum calling from London. The first words Ugo Giaccheri heard Rúḥíyyih Khánum speak were, "The Guardian is dead." 2 hours later, Ugo Giaccheri was on a flight to London, and he arrived that day in the evening. Monday, November 4th, 1957, Rúḥíyyih Khánum's first cable to the Baha'i world. The Guardian's passing was just so sudden that Rúḥíyyih Khánum and the Hands of the Cause decided to break the news to the Baha'is of the world in 2 gentle stages, rather than immediately telling them the Guardian had passed away. The other consideration in breaking the news gently was that it was a very delicate attention on the part of Rúḥíyyih Khánum to think of the elderly Baha'is, the ones who had known the Guardian the longest and loved him the longest, people who were sick, people who were just maybe fragile or weak somehow. They would have suffered greatly upon receiving a single cable. So the first cable to the Baha'i of the world would inform them essentially that Shoghi Effendi was very, very desperately ill. And the instructions went to Leroy Iowis in the Holy Land in the form of a cable on the part of Rúḥíyyih Khánum. And she said, she gave them the text of the cable in a sense. She said, "Beloved Guardian, desperately ill, Asiatic flu. Tell Leroy, inform all national assemblies, inform believers, supplicate prayers, divine protection, faith." When that was done, around 5 p.m., Rúḥíyyih Khánum informed Hand of the Cause Leroy Iowis, who had been working with the Guardian so closely for 5 or 6 years now. It was 5 p.m. in London, and it was 7 p.m. in Haifa. The day the Guardian died, still Monday, November 4th, when Rúḥíyyih Khánum called the Hands of the Cause in the Holy Land to inform them of the passing of the Guardian. No one in Haifa had yet received any of the cables of Rúḥíyyih Khánum. So Hand of the Cause, Leroy Iowis, answered the phone, and Rúḥíyyih Khánum told him that the Guardian had passed away that morning in his sleep. Sylvia Iowis, Leroy Iowis's wife, heard him fall to the floor, and she ran to her husband. But by the time she reached him, he had already gotten up and was continuing the conversation with Rúḥíyyih Khánum. Hand of the Cause Amelia Collins, who was deeply close to Shoghi Effendi, she had just arrived the day before, 3rd of November, to be sure that she would be in Haifa to welcome Shoghi Effendi when he came back from his vacation in Europe. Sylvia and Leroy went over to Amelia's room. They'd just left her an hour ago because she just arrived and she was resting in her room, and so they just parted an hour ago, but they went back to her room. And Leroy told Amelia Collins as sweetly and as gently as he possibly could that Shoghi Effendi had passed away, but she had already seen their stricken faces. She laid her head on Leroy's shoulder and she just cried and cried and cried. But then she overcame that moment of crying and she just kept repeating over and over again, God will give me strength. God will give me strength. At 11 p.m. that evening, Leroy, Sylvia, and Amelia walked up to the shrine of the Baba and said many, many prayers. And that was this intense state of prayer was the comfort that they had been yearning for. And then before midnight, Leroy and Sylvia Iowes sent a condolence cable to Rúḥíyyih Khánum. In Guardian's passing, whole Bahá'í world grieved, crushed, but your personal loss insurmountable. Sylvia and myself send deepest sympathy, love, admiration for your strong determination. Assist his released spirit gain ever greater victories. Beloved faith. The next morning, on Tuesday, 5th of November, 1957, Leroy Iowes drove hand of the cause Amelia Collins to the airport where she flew to London to be by Rúḥíyyih Khánum's side. She had become like a mother to Rúḥíyyih Khánum. Amelia Collins' presence would make a huge difference for Rúḥíyyih Khánum. And now the second cable to the Baha'i world. Rúḥíyyih Khánum had made this decision to inform the Baha'is gradually about the Guardian's passing. Something that she herself had not experienced. She, in the hands of the cause, had just felt the full blow of the passing of the Guardian immediately. In her great kindness, she had sent that first cable about the Guardian being desperately ill with the Asian flu. And then later in the day, Rúḥíyyih Khánum sent a second cable to Haifa because she felt it should come from Haifa to all national spiritual assemblies on the morning of Tuesday, 5th November. And that cable read, Shoghi Effendi, beloved of all hearts, sacred trust given believers by Master, passed away sudden heart attack and sleep following Asiatic flu. Stop. Urge believers remain steadfast, cling institution hands lovingly reared, recently reinforced, emphasized by beloved guardians. Stop. Only oneness, heart, oneness, purpose can fittingly testify loyalty all National Assembly's believers, departed guardian who sacrificed self utterly for service faith. Rúḥíyyih. This comes years later, 7 years later. But on the first day of the All India Teaching Conference in October 1964, Rúḥíyyih Khánum told the assembled Baha'is exactly what her reaction had been after the passing of the Guardian. She said, when our beloved Shoghi Effendi died in 1957, I said that the only Baha'i we had in the world had died. On the day the Guardian died, between 7 and 11 p.m., the hands of the cause in the Holy Land safeguarded the Guardian's house and apartments. This is a beautiful view of the house of Abdul Baha, where the Guardian had his office and his personal rooms. During their phone conversation earlier that day, Rúḥíyyih Khánum and Leroy Iowes had decided that Leroy would secure the Guardian's home and office and inform the authorities about the Guardian's passing. So Leroy Iowes, his wife Sylvia, Ethel and Jessie Ravel, the two sisters who had been serving for 6 years in the Holy Land, and all four of them were members of the International Baha'i Council, could not enter the Guardian's apartment or office because the Guardian himself had locked them. So they sealed them off and they put padlocked iron bars on the doors. And they placed the keys to the padlocks in a signed and sealed envelope that they put with their statements. Leroy Iowes arranged for 2 trustworthy Baha'is to sleep in front of the Guardian's apartment and office and at the foot of the staircase so that no one could gain access to the area. Leroy Iwas also took precautions to safeguard the holy places, the shrine of Baha'u'llah at Bahá'í and the shrine of the Bab on Mount Carmel. Several additional Baha'is were stationed at both of the shrines to make sure no one would enter, and all the holy places, including the mansion of Bahá'í, were guarded day and night, with one Baha'i sleeping inside each holy place every night. At 11 p.m. that evening, Leroy Iwas, Sylvia Iwas, and Amelia Collins walked up to the shrine of the Bab and said prayers. We've seen that before. This is the day after the passing of the guardian, Tuesday, November 5th, 1957, finding land for the guardian's resting place. But first, the date of the funeral had to be moved. This is a picture of London. I chose this specific picture to show you how vast London is. And one thing that's going to come up often in this section is the fact that Baha'is, as per the instructions of Baha'u'llah, cannot be buried more than 1 hour's journey from where they pass away. So in 1957, that means that the guardian could not be buried more than an hour away. And because London is so vast, finding land on which they could befittingly bury the guardian of the Baha'i faith became a very difficult issue. A man named Basil Leverton was the funeral director in charge of the arrangements for Shoghi Effendi's interment. Rúḥíyyih Khánum explained to Mr. Leverton the laws of Baha'i burial, including that only a Baha'i could perform the Baha'i burial ceremony, and letting him know that she would make those arrangements personally. The Hands of the Cause wanted to transfer the remains of the guardian to the National Baha'i Center in order to be able to attend to all the funeral matters in the most efficient way possible. But as you see, London was so incredibly vast that they could not bring the body of the guardian in the center of London, because then there was no way they would be able to transport the body again 1 hour's distance to bury him. He had to stay in the periphery where he was. Rúḥíyyih Khánum was confident that Hand of the Cause Dr. Adalbert Muschlegel was the perfect person to prepare the guardian's body for his funeral. Dr. Muschlegel was a physician, he was a Hand of the Cause, and he was also known for his great spirituality. She called him in Stuttgart on Tuesday, November 5th, and informed him of her decision. Dr. Muschlegel accepted immediately, and he and Hand of the Cause Hermann Grossman arrived that evening in London. Originally, the Hands of the Cause planned to bury Shoghi Effendi on Friday, November 8th. This proved too complicated because they needed an additional business day, which was Friday, November 8th, in order to accomplish everything they needed to accomplish for this very complex funeral, which included purchasing a piece of land that would be befitting enough for Shoghi Effendi and building a suitable vault, because the guardian of the Baha'i faith would be in a vault, like Baha'u'llah, like Abdu'l-Baha, not just in a grave where you throw dirt on top. They are buried in dignified vaults. The Hands of the Cause decided to move the date of the funeral from Friday, 8th of November to Saturday, 9th of November. And then they searched for the right place. This is a photograph of the cemetery where the guardian is buried. The most urgent priority for Rúḥíyyih Khánum and the Hands of the Cause was to find a befitting burial place for the guardian's remains. They needed more than just a grave. They needed a plot of land on which they could erect a monument. And this was impossible at first. Hand of the Cause John Ferriby met with the Home Office, the British Minister of the Interior, and was informed that British law prohibited the purchase of land near London for burials. So that avenue of purchasing actual land like we would for a temple, that was not possible. On that rainy afternoon, Rúḥíyyih Khánum, Hassan Balyuzi, and Ugo Giaccheri were taken out to inspect all the possible sites for the guardian's grave in cemeteries within an hour's journey from London. The Hands of the Cause first visited one plot, but it was directly across from an extremely depressing vault for a member of the British nobility. And it was very, very close to the entrance of the cemetery. And it was incredibly expensive. So it was not only unbefitting, but it was also out of the question. So a few minutes before 4:30 p.m. that very day, hands of the cause Rúḥíyyih Khánum, Ugo Giaccheri, and Hassan Balyuzi arrived at the second cemetery. It was called the Great Northern Cemetery at the time, but today it's called the New Southgate Cemetery. It's due north of London. I mean, due north. And it was large. It was 22 hectares. The hands of the cause were pleasantly surprised to find themselves in a beautiful, peaceful spot on a hill, surrounded by rolling countryside where they could hear birds singing in the trees. The cemetery superintendent, Mr. Stanley, escorted them to the best piece of land he had. 30 square meters, almost 100 square feet, in the very center, so not close to the exits or entrances, and at the highest point of the cemetery, coincidentally. The plot was along one of the small cemetery avenues, and it was bordered by great trees that would cast their shade on the spot. Rúḥíyyih Khánum made arrangements to purchase it immediately and gave instructions to build a strong, deep vault on the plot. Tuesday, November 5th, 1957, choosing a befitting casket for the guardian. I would like to thank the Leverton Funeral Homes for giving me this picture of the man who organized Shoghi Effendi's funeral. This man you see here is Basil Leverton. We've spoken about him before. And when I wrote to the Levertons, they shared this picture with me and gave me permission to use it in the chronology. And so I'm very grateful to you. By dusk, Rúḥíyyih Khánum and Hands of the Cause had left the Great Northern Cemetery, and they were on their way to the office of Basil Leverton, the funeral director of Leverton's funeral home. Mr. Leverton helped to plan the guardian's funeral, and he was assisted in this task by his brother Ivor, and his nephew Keith. Basil Leverton helped Rúḥíyyih Khánum and the Hands of the Cause with the heartbreaking task of selecting a casket for their beloved guardian. After a long consultation, they all agreed that the guardian should be buried in a dark, polished bronze casket, the most dignified, the most expensive, and the most enduring they could find. They also ordered a bronze plate to be placed on the upper lid of the casket where an inscription would be made, which we will see later. They promised Mr. Leverton they would communicate with him the text of the inscription on the following day, Wednesday, November 6th. Hand of the Cause Amelia Collins arrived in London from Haifa on Tuesday night to be by Rúḥíyyih Khánum's side. She had lived in Haifa for 6 years, and she'd become a mother figure for Rúḥíyyih Khánum, and so her arrival was a profound comfort. And she had brought with her flowers from the sacred thresholds of the Shrine of the Bab. By the end of the night on Tuesday, the 5th of November, Amelia Collins, as well as every single European Hand of the Cause, were in London and by Rúḥíyyih Khánum's side in this time of devastating loss. On Wednesday, November 6th, the official declaration of the guardian's death. On Wednesday, November 6th, the National Spiritual Assembly of the Bahá'ís of the British Isles communicated to all the believers in their country the heartbreaking news of the passing of the beloved guardian. The Bahá'ís of the British Isles, as members of the community in which this great calamity had occurred, were invited to be present at the funeral of the guardian. On the afternoon of Wednesday, November 6th, Rúḥíyyih Khánum and Amelia Collins drove out to the Great Northern Cemetery and made arrangements with a florist in the neighborhood for the decoration of the chapel and the sheath of flowers which was to cover the casket. Rúḥíyyih Khánum needed a very important and crucial piece of information before the guardian's funeral could take place. It was the law in England that a death must be registered at the register office by a relative in the days immediately following. That same afternoon, Basil Leverton, the funeral director, accompanied Hands of the Cause Amatul Baha, Ugo Giaccheri, and Hassan Balyuzi to make the official declaration of the passing of Shoghi Effendi. They were immediately issued with a certificate of death, and now Mr. Leverton, had the necessary certificate for burial to proceed. The Iranian hands of the cause, Zikrullah Khadem Abul Kazim Faizi, arrived in London in the evening of Wednesday, November 6th. Thursday, November 7th, 1957. The preparations for the Bahá'í burial of the Guardian. This is a photograph of Hand of the Cause Adalbert Muschlegel, German Hand of the Cause, who is the person who prepared the Guardian's body according to Bahá'í funeral rites. The next day, on Thursday, November 7th, 1957, Rúḥíyyih Khánum and Amelia Collins continued to make floral arrangements. They ordered the flowers for the chapel at the cemetery and for the floral banquet of roses, gardenias, and lilies of the valley, Shoghi Effendi's favorite flower, to be placed on the casket. At 2 p.m., Hands of the Cause Rúḥíyyih Khánum and Dr. Adalbert Muschlegel drove to the place where the Guardian's casket was held. When they arrived, Rúḥíyyih Khánum sat in the waiting room while Dr. Muschlegel performed the burial ceremony. Rúḥíyyih Khánum waited for an hour and a half. Rúḥíyyih Khánum bids farewell to her guardian. Once Dr. Adalbert Muschlegel had completed the burial rites for Shoghi Effendi, Rúḥíyyih Khánum asked him for a moment alone with the guardian, so she could say her own last farewell. Rúḥíyyih Khánum never, ever spoke about this moment to another soul. But she would tell the Baha'is, he was our guardian king of the world. We know he was noble because he was our guardian. We know God gave him peace in the end, but as I looked at him, all I could think of was how beautiful he is. A celestial beauty seemed to be poured over him and to the rest on him and streamed from him like a mighty benediction from on high. Friday, November 8th, 1957, the final arrangements for Shoghi Effendi's funeral. Flowers for the guardian. Because we're going to be speaking about them in this story, I found pictures of a flower called an aster. This is a white aster. And these are lavender-colored chrysanthemums, which are also in the story. Friday, November 8th, 1957 was only 4 days after Shoghi Effendi passed away, and it was the day right before his funeral. Throughout that day, in a room filled with flowers, the hands of the cause from Iran, Europe, Africa, and America prayed and kept vigil near the casket of their beloved guardian. Shoghi Effendi was not alone for a second. He was surrounded by hands of the cause praying. At the top of the non-denominational chapel, where the service would be conducted tomorrow, there was an arched alcove filled with a bank of lavender chrysanthemums and white asters, beginning with the deeper shades of purple and going down through violet and then lavender and then white at the top. Like two arms reaching out, garlands of lavender chrysanthemums ran along a cornice which framed the upper part of the chapel, and above this, from wall to wall, was a beam of wood in the center of which a framed greatest name was hung. Beneath this, in the front alcove of the flowers, the casket would be laid to rest on a low platform that was covered with a rich green velvet cloth. Green because traditionally, the direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad are called Sayyids, and they wear green turbans, green coats, like the Bab did. And Shoghi Effendi is directly descended from the Prophet Muhammad on the side of his father because he shares an ancestor with the Bab. And so Shoghi Effendi was a Sayyid. He was a direct descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, and that is the reason why the velvet covering was the color green. It was to honor his descendancy. Seating arrangements were made for the following day, placing the hands of the cause on the right and left of the casket, and there were 100 more chairs that had to be ordered because the chapel only seated about 80 people usually. On Friday evening, Rúḥíyyih Khánum and Emilia Collins drove out to the cemetery to inspect the chapel and the grave. Shoghi Effendi's cypresses. The florist that Rúḥíyyih Khánum and Emilia Collins had found had his instructions, and he was following them very carefully, making every effort to create an atmosphere of beauty worthy of this sacred occasion. In fact, everyone who was not a Baha'i, but who was involved in some way with the funeral of the beloved guardian, to them, he was a stranger, very suddenly passed away in their country, and a foreigner. But they were deeply touched, and they were deeply moved, and they were deeply stirred by what Rúḥíyyih Khánum called the great reverence and love that accompanied the still form of God's great guardian as he passed from his life to the grave. They outdid themselves in showing sympathy and cooperation. At each one of the four corners of the resting place of Shoghi Effendi, Rúḥíyyih Khánum had instructed the florist to plant a small cypress tree in memory of the hundreds of cypresses that Shoghi Effendi had planted throughout his 36 years as guardian, all around Bahá'í and on Mount Carmel. Once he even had come back to the pilgrim house saying, "I planted 11 cypress trees today." Cypress trees, though, they form a direct connection between Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, and Shoghi Effendi, and I'll tell you why. Because it was in a circle of 15 saplings of cypress trees, immediately above where the Shrine of the Bab is now, that Baha'u'llah stood in June 1891 and pointed to the rocky expanse below and said, "This is where you will build the Shrine of the Bab." So it was in the shade of those cypress trees that Abdu'l-Baha built the original square Shrine of the Bab in 1909. And it was in the shade of these even bigger trees now, years and years later, that Shoghi Effendi built the superstructure of the Shrine of the Bab. So the cypresses are like this link between Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, and Shoghi Effendi in terms of the Shrine of the Bab. And they are not the same cypress trees now, but there is still a circle of cypress trees above the Shrine of the Bab in memory of those historic cypress trees. And this is a very interesting story that still takes place the day before the funeral. It's the diplomatic considerations for the guardian's funeral. On the left here, this gentleman in a dark suit is Eliyahu Eilat, the Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom in 1957. And on the right here is Gershon Avner. He is going to be the person to attend the funeral. On Friday, November 8th, 1957, the guardian's sealed casket with the affixed bronze plate in the center of it, I will tell you what it says after the funeral, was banked with flowers. Hands of the cause took turn keeping vigil over the guardian's casket the entire day, never leaving the guardian alone, and final arrangements were being made for Saturday's massive funeral cortege. The afternoon of Friday, November 8th, was spent coordinating the logistics of flying every single hand of the cause from London to Haifa for the conclave, which was to take place on Monday, November 18th. Now, conclave is what we call meetings when all the hands of the cause were meeting. We don't call it a meeting of hands of the cause. We call it a conclave of hands of the cause. And I'm going to speak about this after in the epilogue. The hands of the cause, upon consulting, had decided to keep the guardian's funeral a private event. So there would only be Baha'is attending because there was very little space at the chapel. But the Israeli government made a spontaneous gesture of respect and paying homage to Shoghi Effendi by sending their personal representative to the funeral. This representative's name was Gershon Avner. The Israeli government would have sent their ambassador, Eliyahu Eilat, but he was absent from England at the time, and so Gershon Avner represented the Israeli government. He would be the only person to attend the funeral of the Guardian that would not be a Baha'i. The meeting of the 12 Hands of the Cause in London. As the Guardian's casket was extremely heavy, the Hands of the Cause carefully chose special pallbearers that were physically strong enough to carry the Guardian's casket while maintaining the utmost dignity. In the evening of Friday, November 8th, the 12 Hands of the Cause present in London met together to prepare prayers and readings for the Guardian's funeral the next day. They carefully chose them because they knew that Gershon Avner was not a Baha'i and he would be present. And so they kept that in mind as they chose the readings. They worked very late into the night. These 12 Hands of the Cause, more Hands of the Cause would arrive after this meeting and until Sunday, are Rúḥíyyih Khánum, Hassan Balyuzi, John Farabee, Ugo Giaccheri, Amelia Collins, Dr. Murschlegel, Hermann Grossman, Paul Haney, William Sears, Abul Kazim Faizi, Shuaula Alai, and Mason Remy. At the National Baha'i Center the day before the funeral. This is a group of Baha'is standing in front of 27 Rutland Gate, the National Baha'i Center of the United Kingdom. So for the entire week before the Guardian's funeral, from the 4th to the 9th of November 1957, the National Baha'i Center at 27 Rutland Gate was inundated by calls, telegrams, requests for information, requests for direction, by agonizing, devastated, sad Baha'is. They wanted to know details of the funeral, where it was, how they could get to the cemetery, where they could stay, and more. The telephone at the National Center rang uninterruptedly. Hand of the Cause John Farabee, Secretary of the British National Assembly, with the constant help of his wife Dorothy Cansdale, also a member of the National Assembly, were utterly deluged with work. They answered phone calls from Jakarta, Bombay, Kuwait, Israel, the United States, Europe, responding to a ceaseless flow of cables and letters pouring in and out. They wrote press releases and they gave interviews, and it became very clear that the influx of Hands of the Cause, National Spiritual Assembly members, auxiliary board members, a large number of British Baha'is, that the funeral was going to be a very large funeral. However, it was very, very sad because all these people that were flying in to London would arrive too late because the funeral was the next day. And Rúḥíyyih Khánum described this. She said, as the Baha'is arrived in ever-increasing numbers, a great flood tide of love and sorrow was rising about the silent figure of the sign of God on earth, preparing to bear his sacred remains befittingly to the grave. And now we come to Saturday, November 9th, 1957, the funeral of the beloved Guardian. On the morning of the funeral of Shoghi Effendi, Leroy Iowis arrived from the Holy Land with important items. Leroy Iowis was not just a hand of the cause. He was the Secretary General of the International Baha'i Council, and so he had very promptly informed the Israeli authorities regarding the sudden and unexpected passing of Shoghi Effendi, the head of the Baha'i faith, whose world headquarters and all their holy places were in the Holy Land, in Israel. After properly and thoroughly lacking and sealing the Guardian's rooms and office at the house of Abdul Baha, Leroy Iowis had left Haifa and arrived in London at 8 in the morning on the day of the funeral. He was bringing with him items that Rúḥíyyih Khánum had asked him to bring. Specifically, a small rug from the innermost shrine of Baha'u'llah at Bahji, which was to carpet the floor of the vault on which would rest the casket of the Guardian, and a covering which had also rested on the innermost shrine of Baha'u'llah with which to cover the casket before putting it down. Leroy Iowis also brought a bouquet of white jasmine, the Guardian's favorite scent, and a box of flowers gathered from the gardens at Bahji, the Rizvan Garden, Mazrae, and the gardens on Mount Carmel. The Guardian's funeral cortege of 65 cars, Saturday, November 9th. Every single event that follows is all on Saturday, November 9th. This is an actual photograph of one of the cars parked in front of the Baha'i Center, and Baha'is, I suppose, waiting to enter the cars in order. The Guardian's funeral cortege of 65 cars carrying 360 Baha'is gathered at 10 in the morning in front of the National Baha'i Center at 27 Rutland Gate, opposite Hyde Park. They left the National Center 40 minutes later in a solemn file, and met the hearse on the way in Hampstead Avenue, near Avenue Road and Finchley Road. At the very front of the funeral cortege was a floral hearse, followed by the hearse carrying the casket of the beloved Guardian, which was then followed by a car with Hands of the Cause, Rúḥíyyih Khánum and Amelia Collins. Behind that car was a car with all the other remaining Hands of the Cause. Behind them were the National Spiritual Assembly of the British Isles. Behind them were the members of the auxiliary boards. And lastly, in all the rest of the cars, the Baha'is of Britain and all the other countries that were attending the funeral. It was one of the largest funerals that London had seen in recent years. If you can just imagine a funeral cortege of 65 cars. The funeral cortege arrived at the Great Northern Cemetery, New Southgate Cemetery, in less than an hour. And when they arrived, they found a large crowd of Baha'is was already waiting at the door of the chapel, each face bearing its very own special measure of grief and tears. The arrival at the cemetery. This is the hearse arriving at the cemetery, followed by the car of Amatul Baha here. And this, as you can see inside, is where the casket of the beloved Guardian is. The funeral cortege arrived at the Great Northern Cemetery at New Southgate in less than an hour. And when they arrived, they parked in front of the chapel. Then the casket of the Guardian had to be brought inside the chapel. So here you see the waiting Baha'is, and here are 1, 2, 3, 4 of the pallbearers getting ready to bring the casket of the Guardian into the chapel. The Guardian's casket was covered with a large blanket of deep red roses with fragrant white gardenias, fuchsias, and lilies of the valley. In the center, there was a very simple card which read, "From Rúḥíyyih and all your loved ones and lovers all over the world whose hearts are broken." And this is an extraordinary photo from the Baha'i World, Volume 13. This is a photo of inside the chapel of the Baha'is attending the funeral of the Guardian. Inside the chapel at the cemetery, so there was this platform that I've spoken about already, and on both sides of the platforms were several rows of chairs. Rúḥíyyih Khánum sat on the right with Amelia Collins behind her, and behind them in the second row were the rest of the Hands of the Cause and Gershon Avner, the representative of the Israeli government. Here you see photos of Baha'is entering the chapel for the funeral service. They filled all the seats that were available. Remember, 100 extra chairs were brought in, but then all the seats were full, so Baha'is were standing all the way to the door. And in the end, the rest of the Baha'is, probably 200 or so, had to be standing outside to try and hear the readings. And every person rose to their feet, while Hand of the Cause, Abul Kazim Faizi chanted the prayer for the dead, revealed by Baha'u'llah in Arabic with deep, deep emotion. Hand of the Cause, Abul Kazim Faizi had a beautiful chanting voice, enchanting, in fact. He had come on pilgrimage when he was a student at the American University of Beirut, and the Guardian, on behalf of the Greatest Holy Leaf, had asked him to chant prayers. And he had started chanting a tablet and turned to the Guardian and said, "This is a very long one." And the Guardian said, "Yes, I know. It was one of the early ones revealed in Baghdad." And so he chanted this very long prayer. And he was the one who chanted the prayer of the dead for the guardian, a man whose voice both the greatest holy leaf and the guardian had always loved. The devotional program at the guardian's funeral. So this devotional program that the 12 Hands of the Cause had worked on that evening, the preceding evening, was composed of 5 Arabic hidden words, 2 in English and 3 in the Arabic language. And 1 hidden word, number 32 in Arabic, was said in both English and Arabic. In Arabic, of course, it was chanted, and in English, it was read. There were also 2 prayers, 2 excerpts from the writings of Baha'u'llah, and the first 2 paragraphs of the Will and Testament of Abdul Baha. All the prayers and selections in English, Arabic, and Persian were read or chanted by Betty Reed, Bora Cavalin, Adib Taherzadeh, William Sears, Elsie Austin, who is pictured here in this photograph, Ian Semple, and Enoch Olinga, all Baha'is with very beautiful voices and from every continent. You can find the entire devotional program for the Guardian's funeral at the Utterance Project. I'm not going to read it all. Just going to show you. There you go. And selection number 10. After the program inside the chapel, the Guardian's casket was carried to the gravesite. In a solemn file, the Baha'is followed these amazingly strong and amazingly dignified pallbearers carrying the very heavy casket of the Guardian to his beautiful resting place, this magical resting place that was just waiting for the beloved Guardian. And you see them here in this solemn, organized file following to the graveside. The Guardian's casket was deposited in his resting place at the head of the grave and facing the Qibla, the holiest place on earth for Baha'is, which is the shrine of Baha'u'llah at Bahji in Israel. And this is a photograph of the grave of the Guardian covered in flowers. But at the time, the gravesite was covered with mats of green straw imitating grass because it was the middle of winter. So the mats of green straw were sort of an attempt at making it less dreary, I suppose. The grave was lined with cedar boughs, which you'll see a little bit later. These cedar boughs were pinned with flowers all along these cedar boughs. And when they finally removed the flowers from the casket, the inscription on the casket, which the Rúḥíyyih Khánum had ordered, was revealed, and it read, Shoghi Effendi Rabbani, first guardian of the Baha'i faith. As everyone stood silently, Rúḥíyyih Khánum felt the agony of the hearts around her, and she wrote later, he was their guardian. He was going forever from their eyes, suddenly snatched from them by the immutable decree of God, whose will no man dare question. They had not seen him, had not been able to draw near him. This is another photograph of Baha'is at the grave site. Rúḥíyyih Khánum, so kind, so thoughtful, had made a decision that an announcement be made before the Guardian's casket was lowered forever into the vault, that any Baha'i who wished to pay their last respects could do so. Rúḥíyyih Khánum was described by Marian Hoffman during the funeral as being a queen, a sister, a mother to those too much overcome, a tower of strength, the wife of our guardian. For the most part, in rare demonstration of love, grief, and reverence, the Baha'is knelt and kissed the edge or handles of the casket. Children bowed their little heads beside their mothers. Old men wept, and even the British, famous for their stoicism, melted as they said goodbye to their beloved guardian. Rúḥíyyih Khánum described how it seemed to her that even nature wept over Shoghi Effendi. The morning had been sunny and fair. Now a gentle shower started and sprinkled a few drops on the casket as if nature herself were suddenly moved to tears. Under a sea of umbrellas on the casket, small flasks of attar of roses. Some people put a rose. Other, with trailing fingers, carried away a little bit of the earth near the casket as a memento. They cried. They placed kisses. They swore solemn inner vows that they passed by the casket of the one who had called himself their true brother for 36 years. By this time, the guardian's service had lasted 4 hours. Gershon Avner, the representative of the Israeli government, was obviously deeply moved as he himself filed by the casket to pay his own last personal respects with a bowed head. It took about 2 hours until the last person had said goodbye to the guardian. Rúḥíyyih Khánum herself then approached the casket of her guardian and beloved husband. She knelt by it and prayed for a moment, then had the green cloth spread over it, followed by the blue and gold brocade that Leroy Iwas had just brought from the innermost shrine of Baha'u'llah. And then she brought the jasmine flowers that Leroy Iwas had also brought, and she laid them over the length of the brocade. And this is the photograph I told you I would show you. It is those boughs that are covered with flowers inside the deep vault. And in the vault, you can see this beautiful brocade with the flowers that Rúḥíyyih Khánum sprinkled on them if you look carefully. The mortal remains of the one whom Abdu'l-Baha had designated the most wondrous, most unique and priceless pearl that doth gleam out of the twin surging seas, was then slowly lowered into the vault that had been constructed amid wall coverings with evergreen boughs and studded with flowers, to rest upon the Persian carpet that had been laid at the bottom, that had come from the holiest of holies, the shrine of Baha'u'llah at Bahá'í. Prayers read at the graveside of the guardian. After the guardian's casket was lowered into the grave, a woman chanted an unplanned prayer in Persian. But then the formal program continued. There was a prayer in Persian that was one of Shoghi Effendi's own revealed prayers, which was chanted by Ali Naqshbandi. The English prayer was read by Hand of the Cause and member of the family of the Bab, Hassan Balyuzi. And exceptionally, I'm going to read both because we are nearing the end of this chronology, and I would like to have a moment of prayer with you. The prayer by Shoghi Effendi chanted in Persian by Ali Naqshbandi is it's very interesting, in fact, because the guardian did not like his Persian prayers to be translated into English. So it's absolute honor to be able to have the English of this prayer. This prayer is called Dar in Layli Layla, in this darkest night, translated into English by Hand of the Cause Hassan Balyuzi. This is a prayer, as I said, revealed by Shoghi Effendi in Persian. He is God, O mighty Lord. Thou seest what has befallen thy helpless lovers in this darkest of long nights. Thou knowest how in all these years of separation from thy beauty, the confidence of thy mystery, have been ever acquainted with burning grief. O powerful Master, suffer not thy wayfarers to be abased and brought low. Succor this handful of feeble creatures with the potency of thy might. Exalt thy loved ones before the assemblage of man, and grant them strength. Allow these broken-winged beings to raise their heads in glory in the fulfillment of their hopes, that we, in these brief days of life, may gaze with our physical eyes on the elevation and exaltation of thy faith, and soar up to thee with gladdened souls and blissful hearts. Thou knowest that since thy ascension we seek no name or fame, that in this swiftly passing world we wish henceforth no joy, no delight, and no good fortune. Then keep thy word and exhilarate once more the lives of these, thy sick at heart. Bring lights to the expectant eyes, balm to our stricken breasts. Lead thou the caravans of the city into those love, swiftly to their intended goal. Draw those who sorrow after thee in the high court of reunion with thee. Those in this world below, we ask nothing but the triumph of thy cause. And within the precincts of thy boundless mercy, we hope for nothing but thy presence. Thou art the witness, the haven, the refuge. Thou art he who rendereth victorious this band of the innocent. And the very, very last prayer was read in English. Glory be to thee, O God, for thy manifestation of love to mankind. O thou who art our life and light, guide thy servants in thy way, and make us rich in thee and free from all save thee. God, teach us thy oneness and give us a realization of thy unity, that we may see no one save thee. Thou art the merciful and the giver of bounty. O God, create the hearts of thy beloved, the fire of thy love, that it may consume the thought of everything save thee. Reveal to us, O God, thine exalted eternity, that thou hast ever been and wilt ever be, and that there is no God save thee. Verily, in thee will we find comfort and strength. The guardian's vault is sealed. After the final prayer, and the majority of the Baha'is had left the cemetery, the hands of the cause, the members of the National Spiritual Assembly of the British Isles and the members of the auxiliary boards gathered together and said many prayers in many languages, representing many countries in the world. Hand of the cause Tarazullah Samandari, the only remaining hand of the cause to have ever been in the presence of Baha'u'llah, placed orange and olive branches from the actual garden of Rizwan in Baghdad, where Baha'u'llah had declared his mission 94 years before. Hand of the cause Leroy Iowis had brought enough flowers from the Baha'i gardens in the Holy Land for every single person present to have something to offer the guardian and place for the last time on his casket. As Rúḥíyyih Khánum described the touching scene, over the tomb, at his feet, like a shield of crimson and white, lay the fragrant sheath of blossoms which had covered his casket, and heaped about was a rich carpet of exquisite flowers, symbols of the love, the suffering of so many hearts, and no doubt the silent bearers of vows to make the spirit of the guardian happy now, to fulfill his plans, carry on his work, be worthy at last of the love and inspired self-sacrificing leadership he gave them for 36 years of his life. After this, the hands of the cause, National Spiritual Assembly members and auxiliary board members ensured together that the vault of the guardian's resting place was properly and duly sealed. The next day, Sunday, November 10th, memorial meetings for the guardian. This is a very sweet, though not high quality photograph of Hand of the Cause Bill Sears and the American Baha'is remembering Shoghi Effendi on May 2nd, 1958, as he places a wreath on the gravesite of the guardian. On the day after the funeral, Sunday, November 10th, 1957, Rúḥíyyih Khánum sent a message to the grieving Baha'i world, informing them about the funeral and requesting believers to hold memorial gatherings. Beloved guardian, laid rest London according laws actas in beautiful spot. After impressive ceremony held presence multitude believers, representing over 25 countries, east and west. Doctors assure sudden passing involved no suffering. Blessed countenance bore expression, infinite beauty, peace, majesty. 18 hands assembled funeral urge national bodies. Request all believers hold memorial meetings 18th November commemorating Day Spring divine guidance who was left us after 36 years, utter self-sacrifice, ceaseless labors, constant vigilance, Rúḥíyyih. Epilogue. 1957 to today, the Ministry of the Custodians and the Universal House of Justice. Sunday, November 10th, 1957 to October 1958, the column and the eagle at the guardian's resting place. So on the same day that Rúḥíyyih Khánum sent the cable to the entire Baha'i world asking for memorial gatherings to be held on the 18th of November, which was incidentally the date that the conclave of the Hands of the Cause was going to be meeting for the first time in Haifa, She drove to the grave of the guardian with Amelia Collins. And she describes her powerful experience while she was there, as she was driving away. It was very strange because God knows I had no mind left or anything at that point. I saw before me in my mind's eye a column and a globe and an eagle and steps underneath it. 11 months later, in October 1958, the monument at the Guardian's resting place was complete. There were elegant stone balustrades enclosing a stunning space. In the center, steps, and then in the middle of the steps, a Corinthian column topped with a globe, and poised on the globe, an amazingly, extraordinarily beautiful gilded eagle that's poised. Oh, is it in mid-flight? Is it landing? Is it taking off? That's why it's so beautiful. There's this sense of energy, but also mystery in the poise of the eagle. This eagle was actually duplicated from an eagle that Shoghi Effendi absolutely loved, which he purchased in either 1946 or 1947 in Scotland. And he loved it so much, he had it placed near his bed for the last 10 years of his life. The eagle's claws are resting on the continent of Africa. And the reason is because the African continent and the entry by troops and the mass teaching in Teso, Uganda, were what had brought so much joy to, so much more than any place on earth, so much joy to the Guardian. And that is why the eagle is on Africa. The Guardian had always loved the idea of a single column, and he had always wanted to place a single column in the gardens. And always, Rúḥíyyih Khánum had said, but wouldn't it look just strange? But he had always wanted one, and he had never gotten one. And in the end, Rúḥíyyih Khánum made sure the Guardian got his single column. 4th of November, 1957 to the 21st of April, 1963, the Ministry of the Custodians. And so now I told you I was going to tell you about the conclave. This is the first conclave of the Hands of the Cause. All of the Hands of the Cause gathered together in the Holy Land for a long, several days of meetings. They had a meeting like this every year. They had 5 conclaves in 1957, 58, 59, 60, 61, and 62. And then in 63, the Universal House of Justice was elected. But what happened was, at the time of the Guardian's passing on the 4th of November, 1957, there were 27 living hands of the cause, whom Shoghi Effendi called the chief stewards of Baha'u'llah's embryonic world commonwealth. Stewards take care of things. The hands of the cause were the stewards of the administrative order of Baha'u'llah, of the Baha'i community, of the Baha'is. They would take care of the Baha'is until they could elect the Universal House of Justice. For 5.5 years, from the passing of the Guardian until the Universal House of Justice was elected and took the reins of the faith, the Baha'i community was guided and protected by this body of hands of the cause, which we call in Baha'i history the Ministry of the Custodians. The Ministry of the Custodians is the period between 1957 and 1963, when there was no longer a Guardian and the House of Justice had not yet been elected, and they kept everybody under the shadow and protection of the covenant. They protected the Baha'is and the Baha'i faith with undeviating firmness, and they followed absolutely and exactly the plans of Shoghi Effendi for the successful completion of the 10-year crusade for expansion and consolidation of the faith worldwide. But the other thing that they did is they made preparations for not only the Baha'i world, but the Baha'i institutions to elect the Universal House of Justice. And one of the most important things that they did is after the passing of the beloved Guardian, there were 26 national spiritual assemblies. And in 5 years, the Ministry of the Custodians encouraged the Baha'i administrative order to such a degree that the number of national spiritual assembly more than doubled to 56 national spiritual assembly in 1963 from 26 in 1957. 21 to 23 April 1953, the election of the Universal House of Justice. So in Baha'i terminology, Baha'is don't elect national spiritual assemblies. Baha'is elect delegates The delegates meet at the National Convention, and the delegates elect the National Spiritual Assembly. The same thing happens with the Universal House of Justice. But the delegates to the International Convention are not elected. They are National Spiritual Assembly members. And what you see here is a photograph of all of the National Spiritual Assembly members from the entire world that were able to travel to Haifa to elect the first Universal House of Justice, taken in front of the International Baha'i Archives. 504 members of all 56 National Spiritual Assemblies around the world were eligible to vote on the first international convention in Haifa from the 21st to the 23rd of April. Of the 504 possible delegates, 288 voted in person, and the remainder cast absentee ballots. These people you see there are the first people in history to ever have elected a Universal House of Justice. On the 21st of April, 1963, exactly to the day, 100 years since the declaration of Baha'u'llah in the Garden of Rizwan. The first Baha'i World Congress. This is a view of some of the 6,000 Baha'is present at the first Baha'i Congress in Royal Albert Hall in London in April-May 1963. Exactly 7 days after the election of the Universal House of Justice in Haifa, from 28th of April to the 2nd of May 1963, an event long planned by The Guardian took place, the first Baha'i World Congress. Shoghi Effendi had envisioned the Baha'i World Congress as a moving commemoration of the centenary of Baha'u'llah's declaration in the Garden of Rizwan in Baghdad in April 1963. And it was also supposed to be a joyous celebration of the successful completion of the 10-year crusade. The Congress was held at Royal Albert Hall in London and attended by around 6,000 Baha'is, including a very large number of Knights of Baha'u'llah, members of the auxiliary boards, and members of national spiritual assemblies. The climax of the Baha'i World Congress was when these 6,000 Baha'is got to meet for the first time their Universal House of Justice. Under thunderous applause and so much emotion, the second epoch of the formative age of the Baha'i faith had begun. 1963 to today. This is a view of the seat of the Universal House of Justice on Mount Carmel, across from the International Baha'i Archives. Baha'u'llah ordained the institution of the Universal House of Justice. Abdul Baha expounded upon the role and functions of the Universal House of Justice in his will and testament. Shoghi Effendi lovingly and patiently educated the Baha'is on the mandate and the importance of the Universal House of Justice, calling it, in Citadel of Faith, the crowning stage in the erection of the framework of the Baha'i administrative order. Since 1963, the Universal House of Justice has not only protected and guided the Baha'i community year after year, decade after decade, teaching plan after teaching plan, but it has continued in every single way the work begun by our beloved guardian. I want to thank you all for this immense honor of having spent 21 weeks with you and Shoghi Effendi. And I wish you all well, and thank you again. Okay, so let me see where are participants here. They unmute everybody. Whew.
Can you start the video too?
How do we do that? Hold on. What's going on?
You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Okay, hold on. Let me just. Oh, I'm not the host, so I can't do anything. Jeremiah, are you still there? Can you do it? You guys can talk though, even if your video doesn't work.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm really I can't believe it's finished. I can't believe it. I can't believe I'm not going to see you anymore on Sundays. That's just
Thank you.
hard for me. So
Unfortunately for
I'm going
me,
to contact them on who's the co-host? Clearwater host. Clearwater, can you let people put their videos? I guess you can't. I can't. You should have made me co-host. So let me just see what the messages are. Oh, you're welcome, my friends. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Oh, it's all thank you. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you so
You're
much.
Oh, we have
Hi.
people who want to talk. Yes, Pauline, go ahead.
I'm sorry. All right, I'm back.
That's all right. I had to stop the recording because you weren't here.